the book of Job. We're going to be in chapter 15, beginning in chapter 15. I'm intending to move kind of quick tonight. We're getting into, the second cycle of Job's friends, and frankly, it gets a little repetitive. And so I thought I would sort of, step on the gas a little bit through a few chapters here for a couple of weeks. Just sort of point out some highlights and just talk about a couple of things that kind of come up. There are differences in things they say each time. They seem to develop,
They're pretty
but it's hard to sort of see that, and so for our purposes, I think it's okay just to sort of um, put the hammer down a little bit through these chapters. So we're going to go through, hopefully through chapter 21, or yeah, through chapter 21 tonight, just hitting some highlights and talking about some things that are surfaced. Remember the sort of assumption that is on the table throughout all of this. When people suffer, that means God is punishing them for their wickedness. If they are prosperous, that means God is rewarding them for their righteousness. That's the assumption on the table, and Job's case proves we know that that's wrong. That's not always the case, and certainly is not the case with Job. That he is a righteous man. It's said over and over again in the first couple of chapters. We know about the accuser, the Satan, who has come to God with this proposal or this idea that Job is only righteous because it benefits him, and that if God takes away all the goodies, Job isn't going to be righteous anymore. And what sometimes gets overlooked is throughout the friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, throughout their speeches, they're trying to basically get him to admit to wrongdoing so that God will restore his prosperity, which is sort of the flip side of what the accuser was saying all along, right? That if Job just says, yes, I'm guilty, even when he doesn't think he is, that's just sort of the flip side of what the accuser has been saying. He's just seeking God's reward. He's just seeking so the hardest course for Job is to hold on to his integrity, to insist, no, I haven't done anything wrong, and just bear this unexplained suffering. That's the hardest thing for Job to do throughout this book, and that's what he does throughout the book. So it just sort of speaks to his character and his willingness to bear what God brings him. It's bigger than he imagined, but when he says to his wife, shall we accept good from the Lord and not suffering? Job embodies that through this book. So we have there's three cycles. The friends all speak twice, and then Eliphaz will speak a third time. So we're into the second cycle of speeches by the friends, always interspersed with Job's response. In chapter 15, verse 20 is where we'll sort of pick up. Eliphaz has been talking about the tradition of the elders and the wisdom inherited from previous generations. And it's this idea of reciprocity, this idea that if you're righteous, God is sure to reward you. But if you're wicked, watch out. And he says in verse 20, the wicked writhe in pain throughout their lives. Years of trouble are stored up for the ruthless. The sound of terror rings in their ears, and even on good days, they fear the attack of the destroyer. They dare not go out into the darkness for fear they'll be murdered. They wander around saying, where can I find bread? They know their day of destruction is near. That dark day terrifies them. They live in distress and anguish like a king preparing for battle. For they shake their fists at God, defying the Almighty. Holding their strong shields, they defiantly charge against it. These wicked people are heavy and prosperous. Their waists bulge with fat, but their cities will be ruined. They will live in abandoned houses that are ready to tumble down. Their riches will not last and their wealth will not endure. Their possessions will no longer spread across the horizon. They will not escape the darkness. The burning sun will wither their shoots and the breath of God will destroy them. Let them no longer fool themselves by trusting in empty riches, for emptiness will be their only reward. They'll be cut down in the prime of life. Their branches will never again be green. They'll be like a vine whose grapes are harvested too early, like an olive tree that loses its blossoms before the fruit can form. For the godless are barren. Their homes, enriched through bribery, will burn. They conceive trouble and give birth to evil. Their womb produces deceit. Eliphaz, if anything, has gotten more sure, more certain in his take on this, on what Job is going through, and is just blatantly, just the wicked, the wicked will be destroyed. And they know it, and he says they writhe in pain throughout their lives. And there's a part of us that reads that and goes, boy, wouldn't it be nice if it worked that way? At least I shouldn't say us. A part of me says, wouldn't it be nice if the people I regard as wicked would have this experience? And we know that as Christians, we believe that when Jesus returns, justice will be done, right? And the wicked will face the judgment for their wickedness, their sins. But here in Job, remember, we're not talking much about life after death, right? We're not talking much about some day of the Lord in the future. Job has in mind, and the friends have in mind, this idea that life doesn't work out so well for the wicked, and he's indicting Job in this, right? Because all the things he talks about, most of the things he talks about that Job is that the wicked experience, Job is experiencing. He's writhing in pain. He's got all this trouble. He's got terror in his ears. He's fearing more. He's terrified. He's living in distress, and all of this stuff that Eliphaz says characterizes the life of the wicked. Job is living it. So Eliphaz is just blatantly indicting Job as somebody who is undoubtedly wicked.
So Patrick,
yes, ma'am.
The question. So does Job, because this is probably their culture, does he believe the same thing, yet just not cursing God because he has a faith in God, and so he's carrying both? Like, I believe in God, but I also believe that maybe I did something wicked. I don't know.
I don't think Job, I don't think we get any indication, unless I'm overlooking something, that Job actually thinks he did anything wrong. What he says over and over again, what he insists on over and over, I mean, I think I would at some point be going, well, maybe I did. Job throughout this book has no sense that anything I don't think he thinks he's perfect, but he has no sense that anything he's done should have caused God to do this to him. I think he would have said, going into this, that that's the way it works. I mean, I suspect he would have said that. I think it was part of the culture. I think it even extended in the pagan cultures, right? You got to please the gods. You've got to do what you can to make sure the gods look upon you favorably. And if you do the right things, the gods reward you. So I think probably he would have said, yes, this is how it works, until he's in it, up to his neck, and can't explain it. in that way. Does that make sense? So yeah, so I mean, this is his life, and this is, this is the way he's feeling about, or this is what he's dealing with, and this is what he's hearing. It's it's your sin, it's your wickedness.
If life at that time was anything like now, wouldn't they have seen people who they know have done wicked things, but yet they're living lives of luxury,
Right.
and then they have everything, they have prosperity, they have nice families, and nothing bad seemingly is happening to them, but yet just through their actions they've done wicked things. And how do they explain that?
So I wonder if you kind of hear maybe a hint of Eliphaz sort of hedging his bets a little bit, because he talks about years of trouble being stored up for the ruthless. Like, it's coming, it's coming. And the fear that they might live in, and the distress that they might live in. Verses 28 and 29, it's all future. Their cities will be ruined. They will live in abandoned houses, et cetera, et cetera. The idea being, I think, maybe maybe things are good now, but yeah, it's not going to stay that way.
At some point.
Yeah, it's not going to stay that way. And I mean, I think if your view of the world works for you, it's hard to let go of. And so, they probably just sort of ignore some of the data points that don't work. And plus, if you're wealthy, if you're doing okay, you can kind of be insulated from a lot of the consequences of living irresponsibly. I mean, we see that in our world. It's the people who are wealthiest who don't have to deal with the inequities and the injustices that sometimes their wealth even creates. They're insulated from that. And so perhaps there's some of that as well. So Job says, verse 2 of chapter 16, I've heard all this before. This is starting, it's what we're talking about. It's starting to get a little repetitive here, fellas. What miserable comforters you are. Won't you ever stop blowing hot air? What makes you keep on talking? I could say the same things if you were in my place. What you asked, Colette, did he think? He's like, yeah, I could argue, I could make the same arguments if the situation was reversed. I could spout off criticism and shake my head at you, but if it were me, I would encourage you. I would try to take away your grief. I mean, we all like to think that about ourselves, at least, right? And that's what he says here. I wouldn't do what you're doing to me. Instead, I suffer if I defend myself, and I suffer no less if I refuse to speak. I get it going both ways. If I'm quiet, I suffer from this. If I'm not, I suffer. And then he turns his attention to God. Oh God, you have ground me down and devastated my family. As if to prove I've sinned, you've reduced me to skin and bones. My gaunt flesh testifies against me. God hates me and angrily tears me apart. He snaps his teeth at me and pierces me with his eyes. People jeer and laugh at me. They slap my cheek in contempt. A mob gathers against me. God has handed me over to sinners. He has tossed me into the hands of the wicked. He's feeling pretty rough, right? he's feeling.
Sounds like he believes it.
What's that?
Sounds like he believes he's done wrong.
I get from this that he knows it looks like he has because of the way God is treating him.
Yeah.
But I think he still feels it's
Unwarranted.
verse 11. He's handed me over to sinners. I'm not a sinner. He's handed me over to sinners, right? He's handed me over into the hands of the wicked. Um,
It sounds a little like Jesus did,
yes,
paying a ransom for our
yes,
sin.
yes.
He seems to be paying a ransom for somebody's sin.
Uh, well,
I don't think it's his.
we're going to talk a little more about that. It's an interesting statement. I don't think the book ever suggests that he's suffering for someone else.
So it doesn't suggest that.
But certainly the righteous sufferer. I think as Christians we sometimes see parallels to Jesus and his suffering, unwarranted suffering for sins. We understand the reason for that. We understand that that was redemptive, that was for our benefit, on our behalf. But yeah, I mean, the comparisons are sort of easy to make there, aren't they?
Mhm.
He says in verse 17, Colette, you were asking, he says, verse 17, yet I have done no wrong, and my prayer is pure. He's still saying, right? I haven't done anything. I haven't sinned. So he says in verse 18, then, O earth, do not conceal my blood. Let it cry out on my behalf. You know what he's saying there, right?
Mhm.
Is there another text in the Old Testament where blood cries out from the ground?
Abel.
Cain and Abel, right? And I think it's a similar. I don't know if it's an allusion to that or if it's just sort of a similar idea that the metaphorical, probably some literal blood too, but the metaphorical blood that has been spilled as God has attacked Job cries out from the ground. Job thinks on his behalf. Even now, my witness is in heaven. My advocate is there on high. My friends scorn me, but I pour out my tears to God. I need someone to mediate between God and me, as a person mediates between friends. For soon I must go down that road from which I will never return.
You have to have a thought. Maybe his sin is that he won't admit it. You know,
Well, again,
it's wrong not to admit sin.
yeah, I mean, except that I don't think that's at all what the book suggests.
No, the book doesn't suggest
That he has not sinned, and that he has not sinned by insisting upon his innocence. That's sort of a striking thing for us with reading this book as Christians, because we're sort of used to the idea, not used to it, but we sort of recognize the idea that, all human beings are sinners, right? We read Paul, our righteousness is as filthy rags, right? And we sort of recognize that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We all sort of recognize that. So it's hard to read this and not sort of, read read the New Testament back into it. But I think we're sort of talking apples and oranges a little bit. I think the understanding in the book is that Job has not done wrong. At least he has not done wrong in a way that earns him this catastrophe. And so he keeps on insisting on that innocence. Even though I think we would say, well, Job needed Jesus too. Of course he did. I don't think we would want to argue against that. But I do think that for the purposes of the book, he is as righteous as they come, and this is not earned in any way.
Yeah, I think too. This is good for us, good for me, because even in striving to be right with God, our righteousness, we do sin, but we're not. He causes it to rain on those that are righteous and those that are unrighteous. And so that whole premise that culture has, you do wrong, you're going to be punished. You do right, you get blessings. And that doesn't hold water for us, because you can do right and still have cancer. You can do wrong and still be wealthy. So we can't, it's muddy if we use that as a basis versus God is faithful.
Yeah.
And that's what we're learning, that he is faithful more than how sinful or bad we are, because we all are as filthy rags.
Right, right.
Those
Yeah.
those
Go ahead.
verses, 19 through 21, sounds like what Jesus is for us. And of course, he wouldn't have known anything about Jesus.
Right. And a lot of it's easy to see in a few verses in Job a reference to Jesus. We've already looked at some. For us, the difference is, of course, for us, Jesus has suffered for us, for
Right.
our sins. He's a mediator for us because we deserve punishment, right? We are not righteous before God, and Jesus has made us righteous through his sacrifice, through his death and resurrection, and through his intercession. And we need to talk some about that too. We will, but yeah.
Who is he talking
Well,
about?
and that's an interesting question. Who is he talking about? And I wanted to sort of address that a little bit. Interestingly, Eliphaz suggested back in chapter 5, he said, "Cry for help, but will anyone answer you? Which of the angels will help you?" So far, Job's experience has been that the only other heavenly being in the story is, and Job doesn't even know this, is the accuser, who has certainly not advocated for him, right? In fact, he has done the opposite. So Job is wanting some figure like that advocate, except will be on, or that accuser that will be on his side and will be an advocate for him. If you look ahead, jump ahead to chapter 19. Chapter 19, we'll start in verse 13. Job says, "My relatives stay far away, and my friends have turned against me. My family is gone, and my close friends have forgotten me. My servants and maids consider me a stranger. I'm like a foreigner to them. When I call my servant, he doesn't come. I have to plead with him. My breath is repulsive to my wife. I'm rejected by my own family. Even young children despise me. When I stand to speak, they turn their backs on me. My close friends detest me. Those I loved have turned against me." What he's doing is he's talking. So there's the concept in the Old Testament, the Torah, of the Redeemer, or the next of kin, or the close relative, who is supposed to be the one to look out for someone's interests, right? If they, if a woman's husband dies, his close relative, his redeemer, is supposed to marry her.
So Boaz was
Boaz to Ruth.
kinsman
Ruth,
redeemer.
right? Boaz to Ruth. Yeah, exactly. So there's this whole, but it applies in a lot of contexts. If you got a sense, if your family member is murdered, right? The Redeemer is supposed to go, deal with it, right? The Redeemer in the Torah, unless the murderer goes to a city of refuge. So I mean, there's the whole idea that somebody's got to be looking out for your interests. And Job is looking for that, because as he says in the verses we just read in chapter 19, he's all the people who would normally be those who might serve as the Redeemer have turned away from him. He's got nobody to act in his interest. And so he goes on in verse 23, "Oh, that my words could be recorded. Oh, that they could be inscribed on a monument, carved with an iron chisel and filled with lead, engraved forever in the rock. But as for me, I know that my Redeemer lives, and he will stand upon the earth at last. And after my body is decayed, yet in my body I will see God. I will see him for myself. Yes, I'll see him with my own eyes. I'm overwhelmed at the thought." It sounds like a slight burst of hope that Job has in all this suffering, right? That somehow his Redeemer is in heaven and is going to look out for him. Is it an angelic heavenly being that he has in mind? Is it God himself? So, it's possible that it's God himself, and he's ultimately saying, in the end, God is going to act to redeem me. In the end, I know God is going to advocate for me because I haven't done wrong. I haven't sinned. I haven't deserved this. And so God is in some way going to advocate for me. So I think that's maybe what Job has in mind. Now, you read stuff like that and you go, that sure sounds like our hope as Christians. And I think it is. I think the two overlap because I think our hope is that God ends up acting as our Redeemer, right? God in Christ ends up acting to redeem us and to save us. And it's interesting. After my body has decayed, yet in my body I will see God. Now, in fairness, there is some dispute about how you translate that verse. It's notoriously hard to translate. But if that's close to right, I mean, there's even sort of a sense of resurrection or existence beyond death there, right? There's the idea that in my body, in my flesh, I'll see God. Job just knows it. Incidentally, one of the reasons that resurrection started to became a doctrine among Jewish people, became a hope among at least some Jewish people, was because they saw righteous people persecuted and dying under the Greeks, under the Romans. These horrendous. If you've never heard of Antiochus IV, the Greek king in the intertestamental period between Old Testament and the New Testament, going into the temple and slaughtering the worshipers there, anyway, offering a pig on the altar, desecrating the temple. People saw this, and it was kind of like Job. It was, somehow God is going to act, even if we don't see it until after we die. Somehow God is going to act to redeem us because God is faithful. God is good. God is our covenant God. We believe, we trust in him. And so somehow God is going to act. So, I mean, a lot of what Jesus did and said about himself, and a lot of what the New Testament writers say about Jesus really fits with that whole line of thinking that God will act on behalf of his people somehow. They've already seen it nationally, right? They were dead as a nation in exile, and God brought them back to life. And so it was a short leap from there to personal resurrection that by Jesus' time was a hope among Jewish people.
So are you saying that the Jewish nation believes in resurrection as we do?
I don't think every Jewish person does, no. But during Jesus' time, there was a significant belief in resurrection, resurrection of the righteous. You see it really in the Old Testament. You see it here, a little glimmer of it. You see it in Daniel. It's where you really see the reference to God's people rising out of the dust, and the idea of righteous sufferers who God will redeem became a hope.
The Pharisees believed in resurrection.
Yes.
Sadducees didn't.
Sadducees did not.
The only thing we teach in Bibles.
The Essenes seem to have believed in resurrection.
I figure God must have been somebody. One of the people that he talked with all the time, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I find it hard to believe that people would just come up with that on their own.
So, in some ways, what Job is looking for is not necessarily what we look for in Jesus, but in some ways, yes, it is. And so, yeah, there's some overlap for sure. And there is this, there's this hope. Jesus does act as our intercessor. We see that several times in the New Testament. Hebrews 7:25 comes to mind, where it talks about how Jesus always lives to intercede for us with God. The thing we got to be careful about, though, is as Christians, we don't believe that Jesus is trying to get God to back off because we believe that God came to us in Christ, and so we believe that the Father, Son, and Spirit were all on the same page about that, and there is no intercessor necessary in that Jesus has to talk God into being gracious to us and showing us compassion. But he is our Redeemer. He became our sin so that we could become his righteousness. He's kind of our counter accuser in that way, right? He instead of standing in judgment over us, accusing us, he redeems us. He advocates for us.
I was looking the book of Job as there is a lot of figurative in the system, in a sense that God knows we today, if the book of Job is not exist, what is our faith in, being a righteous at the same time suffering? How are we going to say?
Yeah.
What our stand if somebody fell? Because the world is, if you are a good person, then you have to be blessed.
Right. That's
David
still
said,
there,
I
right?
never see
That
any
assumption
righteous
is still there.
suffer
Yeah.
before. So
Yeah.
everybody mindset is, if you're a good person, then you need to be blessed. And if you are in the midst of blessing and you fall, then a name start coming in.
Yeah.
A name start coming in.
It's still there. It's still part of our
yes.
world. It's still part of our assumptions sometimes.
It's still.
Even people who don't believe in God. Interestingly, one of the things they'll often say is, if there's a God, why do good people suffer? If there's there's the sort of that's
Always.
supposedly the big gun, right? That's the nuclear missile of atheism, supposedly, that people who don't believe in God think we're just all gonna completely lose our faith when we realize that righteous people suffer. Guess what? As Christians, we believe that the most righteous person who ever lived suffered. And did so with God's full knowledge, and in fact did so as part of God's plan. So that's not something that ought to surprise us. We have story upon story in Scripture of righteous people suffering, and so yeah, we ought to have a bigger picture than Job's friends have, and certainly we ought to have a bigger picture than some of the people who challenge faith with words like that. But it's still there. Christians who fall for the whole prosperity gospel thing, that's part of this, right? If I just do enough to please God, he's going to bless me, and the preachers, make the promises. If you give generously, God's gonna return it tenfold, 100-fold. Well, he might, but he might not. I always think of that widow who gave her last couple of coins in the temple, and who Jesus talked about. But Jesus didn't say, she's gonna get rewarded richly. God's gonna bless her now, and everything's gonna be right. I wish Jesus had said, "Hey, ma'am, please don't do that.
That's the difference between Jesus and Job.
Yeah,
That's the difference between Jesus and Job.
yeah,
In Jesus, we live hopeless that at the end of our suffering, we end it to live with him.
yes,
But in Job's situation, at the end of the, he returned his blessing on this earth.
yeah,
So that's the difference between we, the current Christian, and then Job era. And Job know very well that he did nothing wrong. Today, I cannot utter a word that I did nothing wrong. Like the way Paul said, we all fall short of, and then sin. But Job time, the way God deal with them is different thing. So Job know if I do this, sometimes I sit down and I even think and say, that time, how did Job know God? How is it with God comfort him through the you are my, child, I know you. As we today, Jesus be our mediator, and then we see Jesus as a pillar that we follow. But Job time, how did he follow God? How was then? It's not like Abraham or this kind of things. And the Bible said Job always sacrifices for his children.
yeah,
If the children went out and come back, he
Yeah.
said maybe they have done something that is not right. So he sacrificed. So they know what to do to appease God if they err. You see, but right now in Jesus' way, it's different for us.
yeah. Well, chapter 19, I want to look one other verse in chapter 19, or one of the sections. So chapter 18 is Bildad, the second friend's, his second speech. I'm just skipping right over that because it's more the same. And it's, the homes of the wicked will burn down, disease eats their skin. It's just, it ends, chapter 18 ends with, people all over the world from the east to the west, being horrified and appalled when they see the way the wicked are dealt with. And they will say, this was the home of a wicked person, the place of one who rejected God. It's that assumption, right? This person has done wrong. And so, God destroyed them, and the reputation is known worldwide, basically. Job says, yeah, right. He says in verse 4, even if I've sinned, that is my concern, not yours. You think you're better than I am, using my humiliation as evidence of my sin. But it's God who's wronged me, capturing me in his net. What struck me is that whole idea of how we like our neat explanations, and how sometimes as human beings we can lack pity because we want the explanation. We want the easy explanation. And I wonder if that's what's behind some of this with the friends, that they want to take refuge in that easy explanation. Because if Job really didn't sin and all this has happened to him, what does that mean?
Happened to them.
Might happen to them.
Mhm.
So you kind of wonder if sort of lurking in the background is this fear that if they're wrong, that they might wind up where Job is.
Yeah, they're skating on thin ice, I would say.
That if they're mistaken about this, that that could happen to them too. They could lose everything with no sense of why, and so I think they're sort of holding on to that comfortable explanation. And that's what winds up leading them astray, setting them in the wrong direction. Chapter 20 then. What I want to do here. This is Zophar's last thing. I think we're just going to sort of roll through here real quickly. Just a couple of things. verse 4 of chapter 20. Don't you realize that from the beginning of time, ever since people were first placed on the earth, the triumph of the wicked has been short-lived, and the joy of the godless has been only temporary. So that's, there we go. That's the sort of, all right. Sometimes the wicked do okay, but not for long, right? It's always temporary. It's never going to last. And once it goes, it goes. And, their children will beg from the poor. They will, verse 15, this is a vivid one. They will vomit the wealth they swallowed. God won't let them down. They're just kind of, pretty vivid there. So it's again, this same thing that eventually God is going to act. Verse 28, God's anger will descend on them in torrents. This is the reward that God gives the wicked. It is the inheritance decreed by God. So he's still arguing, maybe the wicked, all right, I'll give you. Sometimes it seems like the wicked do okay, but not for long. So Job speaks again. I love verse 2. There's one consolation you can give me. Bear with me and let me speak. After I've spoken, you may resume mocking me. He says, just give it a rest for a second. Let me speak, and then then you can have your turn. My complaint is with God, not with people. So he says in verse 7, why do the wicked prosper, going old and powerful? Verse 9, their homes are safe from every fear, and God doesn't punish them. Their bulls never fail to breed. Their cows bear calves and never miscarry. They let their children frisk about like lambs, their little ones skip and dance. There's music, there's prosperity. Verse 13, they spend their days in prosperity, then go down to the grave in peace. And yet they say to God, go away. We want no part of you in your ways. Who is the Almighty, and why should we obey him? What good will it do us to pray? They think their prosperity is of their own doing, but I'll have nothing to do with that kind of thinking. Yet the light of the wicked never seems to be extinguished. Do they ever have trouble? Does God distribute sorrows to them in anger? Not at all, he says in verse 18. Well, you say at least God will punish their children. That's what Zophar just said, right? The little ones will be begging bread. They'll die, even though they're young. After the parents are gone, the little ones will be punished. And Job says, well, I say he should punish the ones who sinned, so that they understand his judgment. Let them see their destruction with their own eyes. Let them drink deeply of the anger of the Almighty, for they will not care what happens to their family after they're dead. So Job is kind of adopting Zophar's point of view for a second and saying, all right, you're saying that God eventually punishes and maybe punishes the next generation. Job says, what good does that do, right? How helpful is that? Why doesn't God punish the wicked immediately, so that they can see that judgment, they can recognize it perhaps, and maybe, the implication is maybe even change. And he talks about the arbitrariness of it in verse 23. One person dies in prosperity, completely comfortable and secure, the picture of good health, vigorous and fit. Another person dies in bitter poverty, never having tasted the good life, but both are buried in the same dust, both eaten by the same maggots. Very poetic, but it's interesting, isn't it? That the story of the rich man and Lazarus that Jesus tells, I think, kind of is a response to this in some way. They had their good things in their life, right? While the poor man who was overlooked and kept out of the gate, he has his reward.
It only works so far, otherwise it paints a very depressing picture of God.
Yeah,
That every good thing he gives you here is gonna count against you.
yeah. And I don't think we ought to push that. I don't think that was Jesus' point. Jesus' point was, you certainly didn't give, the poor much thought in when you were, living it up. So you had your reward, and this poor guy who didn't get anything in life, now he's gonna be blessed. The situation is gonna be reversed. So, that's sort of Job's argument here. This is, he says, you'll tell me of rich and wicked people whose houses have vanished. This is verse 28, whose houses have vanished because of their sins. But ask those who've been around, and they'll tell you the truth. Evil people are spared in times of calamity and are allowed to escape disaster. And boy, that's still true in our world, right? The wealth and the power can all insulate you. And until, things are going well. Verse 34, then how can your empty cliches comfort me? All your explanations are lies. So Job's pushing it a little bit right now. He's pushing back against this really easy understanding of God, and his whole experience is pushing against that. And again, something he might, before all this, might have agreed with, he's now, pushing back against, because it's not true in his life, and maybe his eyes are open to it, right? It's not true in his life, and he's looking around and he's saying, I'm not sure it was ever true that the wicked got punished and the righteous did not. And so he just sort of, it's maybe dawning on him that this isn't how the world works always. Well, we need to wind things up. Any comments for the last 2 minutes?
I think 16, 17 shows if, you are rich and you have friends, and when calamity hits you, you lost friends. It tells you, those you think that they love you, you see them, that they don't love you. Whatever they love about you is gone. So they also left. And 2, like I was saying, Job era is not about heaven, but we today, our era is about heaven.
Yeah.
Job's blessing want to be felt in this one. When the wicked would not last, Solomon said, yes, indeed. Rest assured that wicked will not go unpunished. But wicked will not go unpunished, but they will, on this earth, they will dominate. They will dominate on this earth in everything until they die. Until they die. But first, the era that Job and those people are talking about this thing, they want the thing to be happening on this earth, for people to see that you are the wicked one. That's why when Job fall into this situation, the friends and everybody say that you have fallen into, a
Clearly,
sin.
obviously,
that's not how it is.
Yeah. And you find out who your friends are in the hard times, right? And that's for sure the way it is with Job. His friends did pretty well for the first week.
Oh yes.
Then they just had to open their mouths, right, and explain everything.
Oh yes. Without them, we will not see all these things. That's right. They are all included for us to be steady.
All right. Thanks, everyone.